Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Metropolitan Black Bar Association's celebration of Women's History Month. My name is Antecisa Green, and I am president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. It is such a pleasure to have everyone here, and even more of a pleasure to have our guest and our moderator here today. If you're not already a member of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, we encourage you to join so that you can be alerted of all of the amazing programs that we have had. This is the third of our final series of Fireside Chats for Women's History Month, but not the final event for Women's History Month. So please make sure you join us for the rest of our events this week. And without further ado, I am going to introduce you to our panelists today, our moderator, Ms. Paula Edgar, who is an attorney and CEO of PGE Consulting that provides strategy on diversity, equity, inclusion. She's also a past president of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, current treasurer of the MBBA, and also president of Friends of MBBA, our charitable arm. Paula?
Basically, that means they won't let me go. Everything that I just said just means that it's going to keep on adding bullet points. Anta, thank you so much for that wonderful intro. And thank you everyone for joining us. We are going to have a fast and furious hour with Maya Wiley. And I'm so excited to have her here with us today. She is a racial justice advocate. She is a leader. She is someone who has walked the walk and talked the talk. And I thought, Maya doesn't know this, but I want to share a story about her before we get started. As to really why I wanted to do this fireside chat when thinking about the fact that we were going to be spotlighting Black women, lawyers, and leaders. It's because when I think about Black women, I think always about service and how I was raised, so many of us were raised to be in service to our communities and to each other. And I was in Brooklyn with my husband hanging out, and we were eating lunch, and I hear Paula, and I'm like, what was going on? And Maya was actually collecting signatures. And I thought to myself, she don't have to be collecting signatures. This was for another candidate. This was, a couple years ago, but it was really that space of service and understanding that we have to not just talk the talk, but we have to walk the walk when we're talking about impacting our communities. And so I really wanted to have this conversation with Maya Wiley today, and I'm glad that it's finally happened and we're all here with you. And so let's go ahead and get started. I don't start fireside chats off unless I get a little bit of a warm up. So I want to make sure that we know not just who you are, but who you are. And that's the purpose of this conversation. And so Maya, coffee, tea, or neither?
Coffee, coffee, coffee. And as a candidate for a mayor, it's more coffee.
Got it. So you're not, there's no like, I have three cups of tea, like what I got to do. Okay, great. Favorite Prince song?
Oh, Purple Rain.
Come on. Yes. Okay. Good. We are winning so far. This one is probably the hardest one I ask anyone. What's your favorite book?
Oh, that really is a hard one. It really is. But I am going to say Song of Solomon. By Toni Morrison, because she is one of my favorite authors, and it was the first Toni Morrison book I read, and it was one that I go back to. It's one I go back to periodically, like every 5-10 years. I got to read it again.
Awesome. Actually, I think about it now, Zora Neale Hurston is my favorite, just because I studied anthropology, but Song of Solomon was such a powerful book, and one that I've committed to rereading all of Morrison's books as an adult. And I'm not there yet, but I feel like it's going to be impactful. Now,
you're going to make me feel bad.
Why?
I have jazz on my list because I share that. James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, two writers I think everybody should read everything they've ever written. And I actually have one that's been sitting on my bookshelf for years that my mother bought for me one year for Christmas, and I still haven't cracked it open, and it makes me feel bad. And now you made me feel worse, Paula, so thanks for that.
I'm a coach, Maya. What I do is I make sure I invigorate people to do the things they're supposed to do. So bad or not, we're going to get it done this year.
Right.
There we go. Okay, so my final question here is this. So we're in the middle of a global pandemic. I think we all know this, even though thankfully, it seems like there's a light at the end of this tunnel that we're going to all be able to hopefully get to whatever our new normal is. What is your favorite place to vacation? And perhaps where are you like really excited to go after all of this is lifted?
I mean, look, I'm excited to go anywhere after like someplace else. But what I will say, and we love to travel, so we usually try to take a really nice family vacation once a year, and have been privileged to do so. But I will say, like, one of our best that was fairly recent before COVID hit was St. Lucia. And I have to say, we were all like, we coming back here. So we love all the islands we've been to. We've been fortunate to travel, but I'm just going to say St. Lucia.
So my husband, who just walked up, who's walking upstairs, his father's from St. Lucia. So he's like, yep.
Oh, well, and actually, I've got a couple of friends from St. Lucia as well. So, but it really is an amazing place.
Fantastic. All of you, I'm going to be putting Maya's bio in the chat so that you can take a look about her fantastic accomplishments, but I'm going to ask her to tell us about them herself. And just as a reminder, if you have questions for Maya during this session, please use the Q&A tab. But if you want to just shout out your own island or your borough or anything else, do that in the chat. You're welcome to do that as well. Even though we can't see each other, we are in community this time. We want to make sure that we are all connecting with each other. So do say hi, shout out your borough. Everyone knows, if you've ever seen me speak, that I talk about Brooklyn every single day. So I'm in Brooklyn. And I'd love to hear where you all are from while I ask Maya to talk about your trajectory. Tell me your origin story. Where did you grow up? Where's your family from? Tell me your story.
So, I was born in Syracuse, New York, because my parents met at the University of Syracuse. And we actually lived in New York City not long after I was born. I was probably about a year old when we moved down to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, because my father left his very, very promising career as a faculty member in the chemistry department at the University of Syracuse. Black man, got a degree in organic chemistry in 1957, no small thing, and it was a big deal. But he was a civil rights activist and joined the civil rights movement and came to New York to work for James Farmer in the Congress on Racial Equality as his number 2. And we lived on the Lower East Side. But when I was about 2.5, my father and my parents moved us to DC, Washington, DC, because he was founding another organization. He wanted to be at the forefront of what became the movement for economic justice, but really came out of the civil rights community, right? And founded the National Welfare Rights Organization. I say all that because that was very formative for me, both we always knew we were New Yorkers in some way. That was a really important period. My mother went to Union Theological Seminary, so New York City and New York State kind of loomed large in our lives. But I did grow up in Washington, D.C., from 2.5 onward, but always knew I was coming back to New York. But as a child of, activists, my mother was a civil rights activist too, in her own right. In fact, that's how they met in a way. And so, that was just a big part of, lived in a Black neighborhood, went to the neighborhood segregated Black public elementary school, started watching my friends disappear, displaced by, we didn't use the word gentrification back then, but that's what was happening in my neighborhood. And I just really marked my life and experiences, both having parents who were activists, and they didn't hesitate to explain to my brother and I what was happening around us and put it in terms. And they were the kind of parents who always told us what it was, like it was. There was no sheltering. But I'd say that in a good way. They really educated us on the world and how it wasn't right. But I also experienced it at a very personal level, because I tell the people this story a lot, by the way, because it shaped why I talk about structural racism and why I founded an organization called the Center for Social Inclusion, whose mission was to dismantle structural racism back in the early 2000s, after 9/11, when we didn't talk about race in that way. But it was because when I was a little kid and I had 2 highly educated parents, My mother used to read Bank Street books. From Bank Street School, like she had the Bank Street readers, and she would read to my brother and I. So we went to school reading ready, right? We went to school. I had all the things that parents were supposed to do for me done for me. And here I was in my neighborhood elementary school, and by second grade, I was 2 years behind grade level. At the top of my class. So by all measures, I was a successful student, except I wasn't. And for all those who say, somehow parents, Black parents fail their kids, or they don't have enough belief in education, or what, the system fails the kids. And so I had that very personal experience with the system failing me and my classmates. But I was also the proof point that don't blame the family. I had a family, I had 2 parents, they're highly educated, did all the things they were supposed to do. It's the system does not work for us. And so
I've heard you speak about this before, and when people think Black lawyers, there's immediately sort of a trajectory of privilege, et cetera. And yes, right? Because there's a privilege of education. But when you think about what you just said and the trajectory that you, having been raised by, academics and folks who are advocates, to still have had that experience in your public school experience, DC, here, any city, right? It resonates for me as a parent in New York City when I think about my own children and their experiences and the disparate experiences that they've had, even though they have me as an advocate and a Black lawyer mother. Similarly, I've had to fight for their education, and I have the tools, but what if I didn't?
Yep. And even though you have the tools, it does take a toll to have to fight. And it takes a toll on the kids that you have to fight. So I do think there's a cost even when we're successful as parents navigating the system.
So I guess I'm gonna do a skip hop on and ask you this question then. So how did you navigate your parenting then to make sure that the educational system was one that you were helping to get your kids the access that they needed?
Yeah, it started with being a parent, right? Meaning, like all parents, we were lucky in the sense that when we moved into our neighborhood, we live in central Brooklyn. I've lived in Brooklyn for 30 years. But when we moved from Fort Greene, when we started having a family, moved from Fort Greene deeper into Brooklyn and into central Brooklyn. But we moved into a neighborhood. My brother happened to have created some programs for the neighborhood public school. So he was like, no, it's a decent school. It's a decent school. And for me, one, we wanted diversity. Like, I know that I also benefited from learning what I learned about the world in my segregated Black school, right? Like, those were life lessons that were important to learn, even if they weren't always easy to learn. And it was a very diverse school, diverse, non-white, but very diverse. But we wanted diversity. We wanted a lot of kids of color. We wanted our kids to really know and understand the world they were in and the neighborhood they were in, right? It's a neighborhood school. So some of it was those kinds of values I was raised with. But I also was not going to put my kids in a failing school. I think I was in a school that failed me, and I wasn't going to do that for my kids, right? But this was not a failing school. And I had my brother telling me, no, you're good. And it was, so those things, I think, are part of what we do as parents to kind of try to navigate and thread the needle around not having our kids be in a situation that doesn't teach them the world and all the people in it, but also isn't going to abuse them or mistreat them or disinvest in them. But I had to advocate too. But by being a parent, I think one of the most important things I did, honestly, I think, was that I volunteered in my daughter's. I remember my older daughter, when she went into first grade, I volunteered in her classroom. Just now, I was a working mom, so I couldn't do it a lot of hours, but I could give 1 hour a week on Monday morning. So I just organized it so I went into work an hour late and spent the first hour of the day on Mondays in my daughter's classroom. And I did that the whole year, kept doing some, couldn't keep it up quite like that. But that just really, it created a different relationship for me with the school and with understanding what was going on in the school as well as in her classroom. And it enabled me to both be a better, more active parent that could help the school. But it also meant I had a much better understanding as a parent where things were going wrong for her. Or for my younger daughter, because I knew the school community more deeply. But that was, let's face it, that was a privilege that I had a kind of job, being a lawyer, having founded my own organization. I could build that kind of flexibility in for myself.
Yeah, I mean, the flexibility piece is wonderful. And it's also, out of want as opposed to necessarily necessity, right? Because I remember my parents being like, hope you make it to school. See you when you get back. Let me go ahead and see your report card. Good, that's an A-. What happened to the mind? Like, that was my West Indian trajectory, and it worked. But I do think that we have to do things and navigate things very differently in these days, particularly as we're thinking about how our children are navigating school and COVID and community and racism, because that's not outside of their experiences in school as well, which is challenging. But I want to get back to your legal career. So give me your elevator pitch, but it's a really long elevator of your legal career. Start us off. Why'd you go to law school? I have a feeling. And then get where you are now.
Yeah, look, I decided, I knew I was going to do racial justice work. I didn't necessarily know how in college, and I think a lot of when you grow up in an activist household, the worst thing you can be is a lawyer. Because the lawyers are the ones that tell you, no, you can't do that without the permit. No, you can't, they're always telling you what you can't do. So, and actually when I was growing up, they had buttons that said, I am not a lawyer, ! Like the activists had a button. So I didn't actually understand it was gonna be law, but I knew it was gonna be racial justice. I knew, like I had the emotional experience of failed schools, of gentrification and displacement. I felt it personally. But I, in college took this class called Law and Society. Now I was a psychology major and it was a psychology course, but I was done. As soon as I took that course, that was it. I was going to law school. It had things like cross-racial identification. We talked about affirmative action. I mean, once I was like, I'm avoiding what I know I want to do. But I knew I was going to be a civil rights lawyer, right? I mean, that was intentional. And I went to Columbia Law School in part because Jack Greenberg, who'd been the director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, who had been on Thurgood Marshall's team arguing Brown v. Board, was a vice dean there. And and Julius Chambers, who was the director counsel at the time, was an adjunct faculty member. And so I knew I wanted, not only did I want to be a civil rights lawyer, I knew I wanted to be at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And I had mapped my whole future out. I was going to go to law school there, clerk, and then I was going to go to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and then I was going to stay there for the rest of my life. And, life happens, right? And I have to say, one of the greatest pleasures of my life. And to this day, one of the places that was home, felt like home, and will always feel like home was the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, because I did make it there. My strategy paid off.
Direction and goal.
Yeah, I did work at the ACLU too before I went to legal defense, because I clerked for a wonderful judge, Black judge, James T. Giles, who was appointed, he was one of the, Carter had appointed him when he was only 36 years old. Amazing judge, amazing human. So that was a wonderful experience. But the point is, I did make it to the Legal Defense Fund. And I thought I was going to be there forever, and maybe even, move up, and maybe even one day could dare to dream, maybe I would be the director counsel one day. Like, that was my career. Like, I mapped it all out. But as things happen, and, Bill Clinton became president, and one of our co-counsel, we had the first woman attorney general and the first woman U.S. attorney for the Southern District, Mary Jo White, and then and then they appointed a woman out of legal aid, Jane Booth, to be the head of the civil division. And then Jane recruited me, and I saw it as a real opportunity to bring the weight of the federal government into civil rights work. So I took it, but did that for 3 years. I think the short answer is that was my trajectory. Although I realized after about 10 years of litigating in different ways and some lobbying, the privilege of being taught how to lobby by the master strategist, Elaine Jones, who had become the first woman director counsel, who was one of the most generous and amazing leaders I know. So I had to call her out on Women's History Month,
right.
Because she was an amazing leader. But I say all that because at the end of the day, we were doing all that legal work to change policy. So I shifted to the policy side. But I loved litigating. I did.
Yes, and you then took that policy baton and ran it into some places where we still need policy work, but you did some wonderful things. I just want the folks in the who are in the audience to, if you were able to design your career from the beginning to the end, at the beginning, you knew what you were going to do from start, and it stayed that way. Let me get a +1 in the chat. I want to see if there are folks who actually are able to do that anymore. We have so many detours in our lives, right? We think about Black women lawyers, all those three things, right? No matter what order you put them in terms of your trajectory. I would love to see, is there anyone, I'm waiting, the chat is like, nope. There is no one like, yes, thank you, Paula, for asking. Here's my docket. And I followed it one by one. So yeah, detour central, negative. So what I think in terms of takeaways from this and what you just said in terms of the first part of your career, what we can get is you can get to where you want to get. And the route is not always going to be a straight route, but it's helpful to have goals and thoughts about where you want to be and how you add value,
Yes. And can I just add to that? Because I think was another gift that my parents gave me is permission. And they did it by modeling, right? Permission to just change course. I have a father who left a career he spent years studying for as an academic in organic chemistry to become a civil rights activist. So, my mother did the same thing, by the way. She also took those career turns, became a small business owner, bought an art gallery. So I think they showed me there by example. But they also showed me use the tools you have been given to fix what's broken for other people.
I love that because we all have tools, right? We have the tool of we amplify voices. We have the skill sets that we have small power and influence and big power and influence. And oftentimes when things get so rough, I don't want to continue very deep into our conversation without acknowledge a few things. One, again, we're still in a global pandemic. Two, our Asian brothers and sisters are being impacted deeply by racism in this country and outside this country. And three, today was the start of the Derek Chauvin trial, right? There's a lot emotionally happening for us as Black people, particularly as Black lawyers, and most definitely for those of us at the intersection of being Black women attorneys. There's a lot, and I want to make sure that you all focus on self-care. And this is part of it. I think hearing the stories of people who have and are doing the work is a great part of how I get self-care. So Maya, I know you think this is about you. It's really about me and you and what we need from each other.
That's self-care.
It is. That's what we're supposed to do as sisters in the struggle and sisters in success. And so I want you to then tell me about later on. Talk to me about the civilian review board. Tell me about some of the other pieces that you've done in terms of advocacy.
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned that I founded an organization, the Center for Social Inclusion, ran it for 12 years, was told, I'm saying this because it was important. I remember that was a big leap, right? Leaving a job and going to a different job, it's a leap. It's not the same kind of leap. Leaving a job and then deciding to found a not-for-profit is a much bigger leap. And I had a lot of people say to me, you can't do that. No one's going to give you money. What, you want to start a foundation, an organization that's going to do policy work on structural racism? Nobody's giving you money for that. And I remember, it hurt. It was painful. And I remember thinking, and I had to kind of do a self-check, and fortunately I have a wonderful partner, a wonderful family. And, I said, look, but I had to like think, if the worst thing that can happen is I just fail at starting this organization or getting it off the ground, I can live with that. I mean, there's so much that you kind of have to, it's not a failure, right? If you try something and it doesn't work out. But it worked out. 12 years I ran it, grew it. Really, really honored to have had the opportunity. And it's what led me to City Hall, because it was that work. Actually, it was that work. People who know me from MSNBC now don't realize that before City Hall, I was already on MSNBC, and it was because of Melissa Harris Perry. She was the first person, when she had her Saturday and Sunday show, she had me on with my other friend and former and mentor, Wade Henderson, when he was still heading the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights, on transportation equity, which is something we were working on together. But I say all that because I think all of that work ended up getting me the opportunity I never thought about, right? Which was to become the first Black woman to be a counsel to New York City mayor. We'd never had one before. And that, I did that for 2.5 years, and, was really grateful for the opportunity, was really grateful to show government how it could be transformative for our communities. We got every single apartment in Queensbridge houses free broadband, for example. Laid out a plan for doing it elsewhere. But I also, sometimes things are also not, you can't do as much as you think you should be able to do. And I left the job in 2016, but the mayor asked me to chair the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, whereas we sit here today hearing of this trial of former police officer Chauvin, devastating reminder of some of what's been happening to folks for years, including Eric Garner. But, I was really, really, really grateful for that opportunity to serve. I had gone into academia, but it's a volunteer position, but you're running the agency, and got Eric Garner's killer, Daniel Pantaleo's case over to the police department, and protecting the civilian prosecution of the case, because the Civilian Complaint Review Board, we have our own, I shouldn't say, I still feel ownership of it. But the CCRB has its own prosecutors, former ADAs from around the city, good lawyers. We had a Black woman who's our chief. I was really proud of that too. But I think the reality is that I was able to protect that the prosecution's office ability to prosecute that case in the police department, which finally got him off the force. But I did other things too, and co-chaired the School Diversity Advisory Group for the Department of Education and the mayor, which with Hazel Dukes as a co-chair, as well as Jose Calderon from the Hispanic Federation. But that was also a real privilege. I think the point is, having had the privilege of public service, I was able to continue that public service even when I wasn't in the job. And I take that back to the lesson my parents taught me, which is do what you can with what you got for people who need it done. And I was able to find a path to keep doing that with city government, even after I left.
I think, we started off talking about service, and that's sort of the chain throughout your career, which is that you're always of service. All right. Because when you started talking about naysayers and folks telling you can't, I think about the fact that you are now embarking upon a process in which you would be the first. You would be the first, right? And the first always has a lot of weight with it, but there's a significant momentum of Black women lawyers, particularly in the last year, but I say forever, of advocacy and what's the word? Advocacy, but also accomplishment, right? Like it's the not just that I'm going to do it and say I'm going to do it, but the actual doing of it. And I think that is a powerful piece of it. And I love the service continuum of what you said. So another hard question: what's the highlight of your legal career? What's the thing that you're most proud of?
That's such a hard one because, I think like all of us, and I know I'm not the only one, especially when you've got over 30 years, there's so many things you're privileged to have done and had the opportunity to do. But I am going to say getting Daniel Pantaleo off the police force. I am going to say that one. And that was not a straight, I mean, it's legal in a complicated way, because of course it was legal because we had to make a decision about finding and making a recommendation of discipline. But that, of course, was not the hard part.
I can imagine.
It's getting to a place where you can get a disparate group of people to agree and pull it together, but also set it up. Because remember, one of the issues the CCRB faces, which we're talking about a lot these days, particularly since George Floyd was murdered. Yes, murdered. That you have to negotiate it in a way because you don't have the power to decide the outcome. And I don't mean the way no lawyers, if you're in court, do you individually decide the outcome, but inside government, where it's about employment, where it's about whether you keep your job or lose your job, that's more about the politics of relationship and the police commissioner. So there was a lot I can't talk about in that, but there was a lot that I had to do to get it to the place where that could happen, that, maybe one day when a lot of people die, I'll write a book. But I say that because it mattered. Mm-hmm. It mattered because justice mattered. And even if it's not all the justice we want, some consequence for a killing of a Black man, it does matter. It does matter.
Indeed. And so much more poignant or as poignant when you think about it today. And so all of my Twitter warriors, hit that one. It's important, right? We want to make sure that we're getting that word out. So let me ask you this. You've already answered the question, but just in case you want to answer it in any additional way, why is civic engagement important?
Civic engagement is, if we put away the wonky term civic engagement, all we're really talking about is a voice to get what we need done for our folks. It's really that simple. So without civic engagement, I know you think this way too, Paula, but civic engagement is voting, right? Of course it is, but that's not all it is. So, and we've seen it, and we're celebrating Black women and have been celebrating Black women because we're the cavalry in a crisis, and we're the defenders of democracy, and we're queens. They were qualified, but it's because we're doing all these different forms of civic engagement, right? It's the community work. It's the church food pantry. It's how we showed up as nurses and volunteering at the churches to do the COVID testing when there wasn't enough COVID testing, or, working with our churches to set up the vaccine sites. And, all that is civic engagement too, working on, fixing our schools. It's all the things that are about problem solving for people is fundamentally what civic engagement is. And so without it, we don't have community. Without it, we don't have progress. And without it, we don't have voice. And so it's just central to what we need to do to create racial justice and equity in this country and in our communities.
I had one of those moments where I sort of felt the electricity of what you said. My mother used to say that you can either be the wind or you can be the leaf. Oh. And essentially the wind is that we're deciding, right? We are making sure that we are part of this process as opposed to letting it happen to us. Mm-hmm. And when I think about what you just said, that's really a crux. And wherever you have influence and ability, we need to be there. And one of those
your mother was, that's mother wit.
Yeah. Oh, Steph, I literally felt it when you were talking just now. And as such, particularly thinking about this last week and what happened in Georgia, when it comes to voting and the things that are happening to take away the access and take away some of the things that have been long, hard fought for. I think of that trajectory. Mm-hmm. And I think about what you're about to do. And someone asked this in the Q&A, and I added up my question too. Why do you want to lead New York City, Maya?
Because we need to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And we need to make a difference in every community, in particular communities of color. And the only way that we are going to make that difference is if we do what Shirley Chisholm said. Shirley Chisholm said, she has so much wisdom. She's another one. You just read quote after quote after quote and go, truth, truth, truth. But one of them that has really, I think best expresses how this calling has come to me, because that's what it is. It's a calling. It's not, I never thought I would run for public office. But as she said, you can try to make progress by whimpering and complaining on the sidelines, or you can make progress by implementing ideas. And at the end of the day, we won't make a difference unless we have the right idea implementers. And idea implementation for Shirley Chisholm was not an intellectual thing purely, right? It was about service, right? She also said service is the rent we pay to be on this earth. But it was about civic engagement, it was about voice, it was about being that wind and not the leaf, right? Because she said they don't give you a chair. If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, right? But we both as a Black community mm-hmm. and other communities that look a little too much like us have for far too long been in pandemic. We've been in a pandemic, but we're the pandemic where we never get the vaccine. And then when the COVID pandemic hits, now we're dying. 88% of deaths, Black and Latino and Asian in this city. No surprise, because we were already in a pandemic before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so at a certain point, when I think back on my parents and everything all the sacrifices I saw them make, that they never thought of as a sacrifice, right? They thought of as service, not sacrifice. But it was always, it ain't good enough, it ain't done. And it hasn't gotten done. Mm-hmm. And so at a certain point, we need a kind of leadership that I have always been looking to support as a voter. But at what point do we look at ourselves and say, for such a time as these, why don't we recognize that we lead? Why don't we recognize who gets it done? Why don't we recognize that not just the tools we have in the toolbox, because I recognize I've been given tools. Mm-hmm. And those tools have been passed down to me, and I have an obligation to use them. But also that we need a compassionate leadership that's connected to our communities. It's going to do it differently, because the reason we haven't made a difference is because we haven't had difference in government.
Speaking of which, haven't had difference, I'm going to mess the number up. Maybe I won't. Sometimes I get good at this. Is it 109 men who have run this city? Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
109 men have been the mayor of New York City, and no women, and definitely no Black women, have been the mayor.
And only one Black man for one term.
Rest in peace, David Jenkins. Yes. Yeah. Rest
in peace. Rest in justice. But think about that. In New York City, 2/3 of this city are people of color. 2/3. We are a substantial number of that, right? And then if you think about all that Black women do to create community, and what little representation Black community has had in the most powerful seats. And that's changing thanks to Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Stacey Abrams, and a whole bunch of other things. But we haven't changed enough right here at home.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question that I want to ask you. And there's two, they're kind of intertwined. But I'll ask the second one first. What does it take for someone to thrive as the first of their identity, first woman, first Black person, et cetera, in a high level, high visibility position?
A hell of a lot of self-awareness and a whole chunk of humility that comes with the confidence, right? Because the confidence can't be an arrogance. So it has to be a humble confidence. And what I mean by that is it's like when I was starting Center for Social Inclusion. Look, I remember when I showed up for college and suddenly was standing in the line at the food hall, listening to white students talk about how Black students were bringing down the quality of their education. Had to get through that, right? Had to find those inner resources, but it's not just the inner resources. Pledge Delta Sigma Theta, some my sorors out there. We find but we also have to find our partnerships. We have to find our safety net. We have to find our folks. We have to be in partnership. That was true when I founded the Center for Social Inclusion, and I had with another Black woman, my dear friend Jocelyn Sargent, political scientist, 2 Black women. But we had to be there for each other differently. We had to tell each other. We have to ignore how they're talking to us and what they're saying to us. But we also had to be humble in the sense it was like, we're trying to do something big. Nobody does anything by themselves. And I think the power of Black women, and I think women in general, but it's also been a deep reserve that we Black women have, is that we know we don't do stuff alone. We never tried. We always did it with community. We always did it in community. We always did it together. And, that is leadership. It is confidence with a certain humility that recognizes we don't do things by ourselves.
I love it. And I'll just tell you, I have no less than 10 texts being like, every other day you wear everything red. And today you in it. And I was like, I didn't even think about it. I just wanted to wear the sweater dress because it's going to be spring soon. But usually I'm full Delta because I wear red every single day, pretty much, especially when I mean business. So, all right. So let's jump into this. I want to get into some other fun questions, and I'm going to run back to this, another one when we're closing. So what do you know now that you wish you'd known as a law student or a young lawyer?
I wish I knew it was going to all work out.
You're preaching on a Monday, Maya. You're preaching on a Monday. It all worked out. It all works out. Mm-hmm.
You're so stressed when you're in it. You're so stressed. And there's so much that kind of tries to beat you down, and hopefully you're going to survive it, but you have those days, and it's all going to be all right.
Just because I know the people who are on here, and I know that I'm on here too, take a deep breath into that one, right? It feels pretty darn heavy, but we're going to make it. And that's an important thing to remember. In this Intersectional Women's History Month, which is the only way we ever do it, we have to remember that a lot of people have come before us thinking, oh, this is bad. And we stand on their shoulders. And yes, it was, but guess what? It's lighter because of their struggle and lighter because we have the reserves. So we know we're going to make it. So thank you for that, Maya. I needed that. So thank you. All right. If you were not working as an attorney right now, or a racial justice advocate, or any of the other pieces that are corollary, trying to take you out of the space, what would you be? Who would you be?
It's so hard to answer that question because it's been so central to who I am for so long, and I've never wanted to be anything else. But I have had this long fantasy of writing novels.
I like it. Everybody pre-order. We're ready.
Right. Writing novels, and particularly, I will say, and because I have 2 daughters and they're 17 and 20 now, and they're fierce and fabulous and teach me every day and give me some gray hairs too. But they, those coming of age struggles, that I had, that I think we have, that I watched my kids have, that they still sometimes have because they're still young. But, there's also a period in there of novel writing of, girls like us coming of age novels.
Mm-hmm. The stories we need to hear, right? Not the, woe is me and all this stuff happened, just literally life living. I always say that's the best anti-racist strategy, right? Just to remind of the humanity across the board, right? That we all lived similar lives and have all kinds of things, crushes and favorite snacks. That's our continuum. All right. So what advice would you give 18-year-old Maya?
18-year-old Maya, I say, stop being so angry. It's okay to be outraged But the anger, you're taking it out on other people. Take the outrage into the change, not onto other people.
That means there was some self-work on that line. Yeah. A lot of places, I think, for us, we were talking about that you had your docket, but then it did kind of this.
Yeah.
Within that, I think leadership means you have to do that self-work too, right? You have to figure out who you are and how you are going to add value to yourself and to the others in your sphere.
Yeah. And how you can be a generous leader. I have been fortunate. My judge that I clerk for, James T. Giles, Elaine Jones, John Powell, who was the legal director at the ACLU when I was there. These were Black people, powerful Black leaders. They were incredibly generous leaders. They really, they made me feel valuable and valued. And they did it while teaching me. And so there's a tremendous generosity in that. That is a giving. That is a recognition of what people need to help build them up. And I've just been so grateful for it. But that helped me navigate that. I think they helped. They really were part of my process without me knowing I needed that process. But their generous leadership gave me that.
I love that. So this is another hard one. I have like 3 hard ones in here. I'll make you choose. Name one Black woman, one, who has inspired you throughout your career.
Well, throughout my career, there's so many. But, I have to say that Johnny Tillman, who was the chair. So when my father created a National Welfare Rights Organization, after he left Congress on racial equality, it was focused on welfare reform and dignity for women on welfare. And Black women were the central organizing principle. And so all these Black women on welfare, who he made his board of directors, who he saw as powerful. He did intersectionality before it was a word, right? It was like women, Black women, and thinking about it from the poverty, intersection with poverty. But Johnny Tillman was the president of his board. And this is a woman who, for me, had tremendous power. Like, all these women were my aunties and they scared me half to death because they were powerful. And I will never forget this, but, Johnny Tillman, that woman was tough, powerful. She grew up on a sharecropping farm. Her parents were sharecroppers in Texas. And when she was 18, left the sharecropping farm to, strike out and earn her living and became a domestic. And when she became a domestic, they had her eating on the back porch with the dogs. She wasn't allowed to eat in the house. So she quit because she was like, she just wouldn't have it. And then she got a job in a laundry. And that was actually a job that she became a union shop steward. It just shows she was fighting her whole dang life, and she becomes this union shop steward, but she gets sick. And she ends up being hospitalized for over a month. And she couldn't work after that, which is how she ended up on welfare. Had kids, her marriage didn't work out, all that. This woman had been through hell and back, but at every single point, she fought. And at every single point, she demanded. And I have a picture with my father and Johnny Tillman and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Johnny Tillman's in the middle and she's holding her grandbaby, little cute baby, grandbaby in her arms. And it looks like, if you don't know the story, it looks like they're having this strategy session or this panel discussion. No, she was taking him to our Right Reverend Dr. King to school because he didn't know enough about welfare and wasn't demanding enough. So Johnny Tillman to me was like what it really means to empower and embody both the kinds of indignities this society has brought on Black women and the power to stand up to it despite the constant humiliations. And so I felt like I have carried her in my heart all these years.
I mean, I feel inspired hearing you talk about her. And that's again, why this is so important. When we as Black women and as Black people are amplifiers, right? We take the stories and the information that we know when we put it out in our community. And that's one of the reasons why doing this series of talking to Black women lawyers this month, and MBBA really wanting to amplify our voices, is such an important piece of this, right? It's not just what you see on paper, and it's not just the glossy pictures, but it's the stories, it's the experiences that all of our speakers, including yourself, have had. That's really what carries us through and holds us up when it gets a little down. So speaking of that, what's the best piece of advice you've received in your career?
Be yourself and be true to yourself.
Well then, authenticity, 100%. Be true to yourself. Twitter warriors, make sure that gets out there. That's important. So often we think, particularly when we go into workplaces, et cetera, that we have to be somebody else, right? In order to be what we want to be. So to be yourself, be authentic. Ooh, okay.
Which is not easy for Black women to be, right? There's lots of incentives against it, but that's why I hold Johnny Tillman in my heart. It's like, if she could be herself with me, with all that I've been given, I can be myself.
Fantastic. So there are some questions in the queue, and I want to remind anybody else that if you have questions that you'd like to ask Tamaya in these last few minutes, please put them in the queue, but I'm going to go to them right now. What will your priorities as mayor be?
My priorities, it starts with recognizing we're not just going to recover from COVID, because New York City was broken for far too many of us before COVID hit. It's that we're going to reimagine New York to hold on to what we love about this city, which is our people, So that means, we're going to develop without displacement. And I've got a plan, New Deal New York, where we're going to create 100,000 new jobs by building things we need built and fixing things we need fixed, like public housing. I got $2 billion I'll put into fixing and renovating NYCHA, like building more affordable housing that's deeply affordable. But we're going to do local targeted hiring. We're going to do women and minority-owned business enterprise contracts. We're going to make sure our small businesses are benefiting. We're also going to invest in our people. I'm going to have $5,000 grants, starting with the 100,000 neediest families for caring for their family members, because that's one of our top costs of living in the city, was before COVID. And women, in particular, women of color, the biggest job losses in this pandemic were women of color, and particularly in the care economy. Women who are taking care of kids, cleaning houses, taking care of the elderly. That's who've been decimated in this economy. So we're going to do that helps families support themselves, but we're also going to create community care centers, drop-off centers in communities, starting with communities hard hit by COVID, which are our communities, so that folks can go to the job interview or go to the doctor's appointment, know the child or the elderly parent has a great caretaker, but also co-locate other services and supports. We got a gun violence plan. We got a plan for small businesses. We got a plan on home ownership. But our focus is how we are investing in our people, in our communities that need the investment the most, as a way that brings us all back, but differently, because we're actually investing in our people who are so used to being avoided when it comes to investment. And I'll change that.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more minutes. So I want to remind you all to put questions in the chat. I want to ask you this question. This is mine, which is what do you think differentiates you from the other candidates for mayor?
I'm Maya Wiley.
I love it. I love it.
And I could say more, but so much of what we talked about is encapsulated in that. I'm not a politician. I'm not running for a career in politics. I'm running because I was called in. I'm running because my entire life has been about making a difference for our people in our communities. And I've done it in every single job. And I've made a difference outside of government and it made a difference inside of government. And I'm the only candidate in this race who actually has sat at the senior table in City Hall and managed from it. And so I say that with gratitude. I'm very grateful for having that opportunity. But that means, look, I know how to get it done, but I know how to get it done for our communities. And I'm the one who's doing it for that purpose and not for any other.
Okay, 2 more questions in here. Do you think bail reform should be amended?
You know, I'm a big proponent of the bail reform law, and look, Carl Heastie, you know, Assemblymember Carl Heastie, who's our majority leader in the Assembly, you know, I think said something that was so wise back when the NYPD was attacking it. He said, let's see if it works, because it was under attack before it was implemented. And with even the New York Post had a story out after the police department and Commissioner Shea were running around saying, this is why violence is increasing. This is why violence is increasing. And their own data that the New York Post, which does nothing but, you know, frankly, speak out for the police department, actually said the numbers don't add up. And actually the very little of this data is pointing to people who are released on bail as the folks who are committing the violence. So I think what we need to do is definitely take a hard look at what's happening, understand it, be transparent about it. And certainly if there's a problem with the law, I'll be the first one to advocate for changing it to make it work. But that is not where we are. It's not where we've been. And frankly, fear has been utilized as a factor to pull away any chance at the opportunity to just let it work. See how it plays out. The other thing I'll say is, you know, I have a gun violence prevention platform, and, you know, I can get wonky. I have been an academic and I am a policy person. The numbers are clear. The research is clear. When we invest in people getting jobs, when we invest in mental health services and trauma-informed care, when we invest in workforce development and education, when we make sure people have a stable place to live, guess what goes down? Violent crime.
Yep, it's all intertwined, right? And I think when we look at these things in silos, it doesn't work. We have to look at how all of the different pieces fit into us being better as citizens and better as a city, right? And looking at who can help to lead that process. So Maya, we have about a minute left because I told you I was going to take my minute back.
Okay.
What would you like to leave us with? What if, of all the things that you've said, what do you think we need to hold in our hearts as we leave this Zoom, especially in this day that is a little bit heavy and this month that is supposed to be focused on Black women, and we're focusing on Black women lawyers? What do you want to leave us with? We
are queens and we are qualified. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that matters is that we know it.
And they'll know it soon enough too. Maya, Wiley, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your engagement, your service. And we thank you for taking the time to talk to the members of the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, and for all of you who have joined us here today. If you're not a member of the MBBA, I encourage you to do so. Let us give back, give Black all times. And we look forward to connecting with you. We have another event that will close out for me, it's Black Women's History Month. Right, it's fine. On Wednesday, and we're looking forward to having that conversation as well. Everyone, stay safe and take care of yourselves. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Metropolitan Black Bar, for everything you do. Everything.
Thanks, Maya.
Be safe and well.
All right. Bye, everyone.